Human blood sprayed the cold steel floor as the Iconian General Arlet slammed his armored fist into Chris Allen's face. Chris collapsed to his knees, struggling against the painful shackles binding his wrists. The bulkhead door clanged shut behind him with an ominous boom, sealing him in the bowels of the alien warship. Kidnapped from Earth mere hours before, Chris found himself surrounded by dozens of other human conscripts, all condemned to fight and die as disposable shock troops for the sprawling Iconian Galactic Empire. "Terran scum!" Arlet snarled, wiping Chris's blood from his gauntlet. The general's ornate armor gleamed under the harsh lights, his rank bars marking him as a top commander. "You savages should be grateful. You now have the privilege of dying for the glory of the Iconian throne." Chris staggered to his feet, rage and despair warring in his heart. Joining the Imperial military had never been his choice. He was a mechanic, not a soldier, with a pregnant wife and young son waiting for him back home. But the Empire did not care about the hopes and dreams of its subjugated races. To the Iconians, humans were primitive brutes, useful only for the sweat of their labor and the blood of their service. As the warship lurched into warp, speeding toward a distant space station and an uncertain future, Chris caught the eye of Mark Donovan, a police officer from Miami shackled across from him. A look of understanding passed between them. They had no intention of meekly accepting their fate. Somehow, someway, they would find a path to freedom, or die trying. The Iconians had no idea of the strength and fury that lurked within the human heart. Chris swore to himself that he would show them, that he would survive this hell and return to his family. And if the Iconians thought humans would be their submissive slaves forever, they had a harsh lesson coming. Humanity would fight back, would resist, would never stop struggling until they shattered the chains of their bondage, or until their species lay dead and forgotten in the cold depths of space. One way or another, the Iconian Empire would learn that it had gravely underestimated the undying human spirit. The transport ship shuddered as it docked with the remote space station. Chris and the other human conscripts were herded out like cattle, with Iconian guards shoving them forward at gunpoint. Sergeant Zorak, a hulking alien with leathery green skin and beady black eyes, sneered at the humans as they stumbled into the main hangar. "Listen up, you pathetic Terran maggots," Zorak bellowed. "You're here because you're the dregs of your species, but the Iconian Empire will shape you into something useful, or break you in the process." Over the next weeks, Chris and the others were subjected to a hellish training regimen designed to push them past their physical and mental limits. They ran endless laps around the station, crawled under live fire in muddy fields, and engaged in brutal hand-to-hand combat drills. Through it all, Zorak and the Iconian instructors taunted them relentlessly. "Faster, you weak Terran scum!" Zorak would scream, lashing out with his electro-whip. "You'll never be as strong as a true Iconian warrior." Chris gritted his teeth and pushed himself harder, refusing to give the sadistic sergeant the satisfaction of seeing him break. In the barracks at night, he tended to the wounds of his fellow conscripts and whispered encouragement to them. "We'll get through this together," he told a tearful young man named Jeremiah. "Stay strong, don't let them win." During a grueling 20-mile hike in full gear, Chris noticed Alex, a scrawny teenager, struggling to keep up. When Alex stumbled and dropped to one knee, Chris hauled him back to his feet. "Come on, Alex, you can do this," Chris urged, slinging the boy's arm over his shoulder, one foot in front of the other. Zorak raged at Chris for daring to help another conscript. "Stupid Terran, you think this is a team sport. You're nothing. You're all nothing." A few days later, during a live-fire exercise, Alex stumbled again and fell screaming to the ground. His leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Enemy fire whizzed over the muddy battlefield as Chris sprinted to Alex's side. He dragged the injured boy into a crater and frantically applied a tourniquet to the wound. "You'll be okay, kid. I've got you," Chris promised, injecting Alex with a pain suppressant. "Alan," Zorak screamed over the din of plasma fire. "Get back in formation, you worthless sack of flesh." Chris ignored him, hoisting Alex over his shoulders in a fireman's carry and charging toward the extraction point. The other human conscripts cheered as he crossed the finish line with his wounded comrade. In the showers afterward, Mark Donovan clapped Chris on the shoulder. "You've got guts, Alan. The way you took charge out there, I'd follow you into battle any day." As the training continued, Chris found himself increasingly looked to as a leader by the other humans and alien conscripts. His calm courage under fire, his compassion for the wounded and struggling, his defiance in the face of their Iconian overlords, it gave them hope and strength, and it made him the most hated conscript in Zorak's eyes. The troop transport shook as it descended through the atmosphere of the contested planet. Chris gripped his plasma rifle, his heart pounding in his chest. Beside him, Mark and the other conscripts sat in tense silence, their faces grim. 2 minutes to drop," the pilot shouted over the intercom. The transport shuddered as Zorgon anti-aircraft fire exploded around them. Chris saw Alex, the young conscript he had saved during training, vomit onto the deck. He reached over and squeezed the kid's shoulder. "Hang tough, Alex. We'll get through this together." The transport hit the ground with a bone-jarring thud. The rear ramp slammed open, revealing the smoke-choked landing zone. Purple plasma bolts sizzled overhead as the conscripts charged down the ramp, seeking cover behind the shattered stumps of trees. Captain Krell strutted down the ramp, his polished armor gleaming. He surveyed the cowering conscripts with disdain. "Listen up, scum," he snarled. "Welcome to Outpost Zeta. You are now on the front lines of the glorious Iconian Empire. The Zorgons are dug in deep, but I expect you worthless maggots to dig them out. Get to the perimeter defenses now." Plasma mines exploded around them as Chris and the others sprinted toward the outpost walls. Conscripts screamed and fell, their bodies shredded by the deadly blasts. Chris spotted a human woman sprawled on the ground, her leg torn off at the knee. He grabbed her by the collar and dragged her to safety behind a low wall. "Medic!" he shouted, frantically trying to stem the bleeding. But there was no medic. Captain Krell had not assigned one to their unit. The woman bled out in minutes, her blood staining Chris's hands. Over the next weeks, the situation at the outpost grew increasingly grim. The Zorgons launched attack after attack, slowly wearing down the defenses. Conscripts died by the dozen, their bodies piling up in the mud. Captain Krell remained safely ensconced in his command bunker, sending the conscripts on one suicide mission after another. "Take that hill," he would scream over the comms. "I don't care how many of you die, just take it." Chris and the others would charge into the teeth of the Zorgon guns, watching their comrades fall around them. They were given no air support, no artillery, no reinforcements. Krell hoarded the outpost's supplies for himself and his Iconian officers. One night, huddled in a cramped dugout with Mark and Alex, Chris reached his breaking point. "This is insanity," he growled, his face streaked with dirt and blood. "Krell is going to get us all killed. We need to do something." Mark nodded grimly. "You're right, but what can we do? We're just conscripts." Chris's mind raced. He thought back to his days as a mechanic working on complex machinery. An idea began to take shape. "And we may be conscripts," he said slowly, "but we're not helpless. We have skills, knowledge, experience. We can use that to our advantage." Over the next days and weeks, Chris began to put his plan into action. During lulls in the fighting, he would sneak out to the perimeter defenses, repairing damaged gun emplacements and laying traps for the Zorgons. He showed the other conscripts how to fortify their positions with scavenged materials, turning foxholes into proper bunkers. At night, he and Mark would gather the conscripts together, teaching them the tactics and strategies Mark had learned as a police officer. They drilled endlessly, learning to work together as a cohesive unit. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. The outpost's defenses held against the Zorgon assaults, the makeshift fortifications and booby traps taking a heavy toll on the attackers. The conscripts fought with newfound discipline and courage, their morale soaring. Captain Krell, however, was not pleased. He watched with growing anger as the conscripts succeeded where he had failed. These lowly humans were making him look weak, incompetent. Late one night, he summoned his most loyal Iconian officers to his command bunker. "That damned Terran, Alan, is becoming a problem," he snarled. "He's turning the conscripts against me, undermining my authority." The officers shifted uneasily. They had seen the change in the conscripts, the newfound fire in their eyes. They feared it, even if they would not admit it. Krail slammed his fist down on the table. "Alan needs to die. I don't care how you do it, but get rid of him. Make it look like an accident or a Zorgon attack. Just do it." The officers nodded and slipped out into the night, their minds already churning with dark plans. Chris slept peacefully in his bunk, unaware of the fate that had just been set into motion. Chris crouched behind a shattered tree stump, his heart pounding in his ears. The ambush had come out of nowhere, a hail of plasma fire shredding through the underbrush and cutting down his fellow conscripts. He'd lost sight of Mark and Alex in the chaos, had heard their screams over the din of battle. Now he was alone, his rifle clutched tight to his chest, surrounded by the corpses of his comrades. A twig snapped behind him. Chris whirled, bringing his rifle to bear, but it was too late. A massive Zorgon loomed over him, a wicked-looking blade glinting in its clawed hand. The creature snarled, its fangs bared, and lunged forward. Chris closed his eyes, waiting for the bite of the blade. But it never came. Instead, there was a fierce battle cry, the clash of metal on metal. His eyes snapped open to see another Zorgon locked in combat with his attacker, their blades flashing in a deadly dance. More Zorgons emerged from the trees, but they weren't attacking him. They were fighting his ambushers, their movements fluid and precise. Within moments, the enemy Zorgons lay dead, their purple blood staining the earth. The lead Zorgon, a towering figure with a crest of horns, turned to Chris. "Human," it growled in heavily accented Galactic common. "You fight well, for an Iconian slave." Chris staggered to his feet, his rifle trained on the Zorgon's chest. "I'm no slave," he spat, "and I'm no friend to the Zorgons either. You've been trying to kill me for weeks." The Zorgon cocked its head, a strangely human gesture. "I am Tarok," it said, "leader of the Zorgon Liberation Front. We fight against the Iconian oppressors, not their conscript cannon fodder." Chris hesitated, then lowered his rifle. "Why did you save me?" Tarok's lipless mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "We've heard of you, human, the one called Chris Allen. You've shown great courage and resourcefulness for one of your kind. We could use someone like you in our fight." Chris shook his head. "I just want to survive, to get back to my family. I never asked for this war." Tarok stepped closer, his yellow eyes boring into Chris's. "None of us asked for this, human. The Iconians came to our world, stripped it of resources, enslaved our people. They've done the same to countless others. How long before they come for your Earth?" Chris felt a chill run down his spine. He thought of his wife, his son, living under the boot of Iconian oppression. Could he really just turn his back on this fight? Pretend it wasn't his problem? Tarok seemed to sense his hesitation. "Come with me, Chris Allen. See the suffering of my people. See the cruelty of the Iconians. Then decide if you can stand idly by." Chris took a deep breath, then nodded. "Okay, show me." Over the next days, Tarok led Chris deep into the Zorgon hinterlands to hidden rebel bases and secret camps. He saw Zorgon children, thin and ragged, their eyes haunted by the horrors they'd witnessed. He saw Zorgon elders, their once proud bearing bent by years of servitude. And he saw the Iconian atrocities firsthand, the mass graves and burned-out villages, the scars of orbital bombardment. At night, huddled around flickering campfires, Tarok told him the history of the Zorgon people, of their ancient culture and traditions. He spoke of the Iconian invasion, the brave but doomed resistance, the long years of guerrilla struggle. "We are not so different, your people and mine," Tarok said softly, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "We both value honor, loyalty, freedom. The Iconians seek to crush these things, to mold the galaxy in their image. But we will not let them." As he listened, Chris felt something stirring in his heart, a sense of kinship with these proud, fierce aliens. They weren't the enemy, he realized. They were victims, just like him. victims of the same tyrannical empire. One morning, as the light of the planet's twin suns slanted through the trees, Chris made his decision. He approached Tarok, his jaw set with determination. "I'll fight with you," he said simply. "I'll use everything I know, everything I've learned, to help you against the Iconians. This is my battle now, too." Tarok clasped Chris's arm, his claws digging into the human skin. "Together," he growled, "we will show the galaxy that the spirit of resistance cannot be extinguished, that hope and freedom are worth fighting for." Chris nodded, a fierce grin spreading across his face. Captain Krell had tried to break him, to turn him into a mindless pawn, but he had underestimated the strength of the human will. Now, alongside his new Zorgan comrades, Chris would strike back against the Iconian oppressors. He would fight not just for his own freedom, but for the freedom of all those suffering under the Empire's yoke. The war was far from over, but with every blow they struck, every Iconian base they destroyed, every slave they liberated, they would fan the flames of rebellion across the stars. And one day, Chris swore he would see the Iconian Empire crumble to dust and stand triumphant among the ruins. The Zorgan rebel base buzzed with newfound energy and purpose. Freed slaves from a dozen species hustled between the ramshackle buildings, carrying weapons, equipment, and medical supplies. A group of insectoid Zeraxians chittered excitedly as they practiced disassembling and reassembling plasma rifles under the guidance of a grizzled human veteran. In the command center, a holographic display showed the movements of Iconian forces across the sector, each red dot a potential target for the growing resistance. Chris leaned over a crate of Zorgan rations, his brow furrowed as he studied a grainy reconnaissance image. Tarok stood beside him, his yellow eyes narrowed. "That's the supply depot," the rebel leader growled. "Heavily guarded." Chris nodded. "But look at the size of it. They're not just storing food and fuel there. Something big is going on." Tarok bared his fangs. "Then we need to find out what it is." They gathered a small team of their best fighters, a mix of humans, Zorgons, and other rebel species. In the pre-dawn darkness, they slipped through the jungle, moving silently toward the Iconian compound. Sentry drones buzzed overhead, searchlights sweeping the perimeter. Chris motioned for the team to hold position as he surveyed the defenses. "Tarok, take your guys and create a diversion at the south gate," he whispered. "Draw their fire. I'll lead a strike team in through the drainage culvert to the north." The Zorgan nodded, unsheathing his blade. "Give them hell, Chris. We'll buy you as much time as we can." Moments later, explosions rocked the compound as Tarok and his warriors attacked. Alarms blared, and Iconian troops rushed to respond. Under cover of the chaos, Chris and his team raced through the culvert, emerging inside the depot's perimeter. They cut down the guards and blasted open the doors to the main storage hangar. Inside, they found crates upon crates of advanced weapons, enough to equip an army. But it was the schematics and data files that caught Chris's eye. He downloaded them onto a portable drive, his heart pounding as he scanned the contents. "It's a planet killer," he breathed, "a super weapon that can wipe out entire worlds." Tarok snarled. "We can't let them finish building it. We have to destroy the prototype." They raced back outside, fighting their way through the swarming Iconian forces. In the distance, the rebel diversion team was being pushed back, taking heavy casualties. Chris gritted his teeth and pushed forward, determined to reach the research facility before it was too late. They breached the outer doors with shaped charges and stormed inside, gunning down scientists and guards alike. In the central lab, they found it, a massive, pulsating device that hummed with malevolent energy. The planet killer. Chris placed the explosives, while Tarok and the others held off the Iconians, but there were too many of them. One by one the rebels fell, until only Chris and Tarok remained, bleeding and exhausted. "Go!" Tarok roared, his blade a blur as he fought. "I'll hold them off." Chris hesitated for a split second, then nodded, setting the detonator and racing for the exit. Behind him, He heard Tarok's defiant battle cry, cut short by a hail of plasma fire. The facility shook as the explosives went off, the planet killer imploding in a blinding flash of light. Chris stumbled outside, his vision blurring, his lungs searing from the smoke. He made it a dozen steps before his legs gave out, and he collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. Footsteps crunched on the rubble, and a shadow fell across him. "Well, well," the voice was cold, mocking. "The great Chris Allen, hero of the rebellion." Chris looked up into the sneering face of General Arlett, the Iconian commander, who had tormented him during his conscript days. Arlett kicked him savagely in the ribs, drawing a gasp of pain. "So you think you've won something here?" the general hissed. "You've changed nothing. The Empire will crush your pathetic little uprising and make an example of all of you." Chris coughed, tasting blood, and pushed himself up on one elbow. He met Arlett's gaze, his eyes hard. "Maybe," he rasped. "Maybe you'll kill me. But others will take up the fight. The Empire's days are numbered. You can't stop what we've started." Arlett's face twisted with rage. He raised his plasma pistol, aiming it at Chris's head. But Chris was already moving, his hand closing around the detonator for the last explosive charge, hidden in his jacket. "See you in hell," he snarled and pressed the button. The world vanished in a roar of light and fire. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left but a smouldering crater where Chris Allen and General Arlett had been. But across the Empire the news spread like wildfire. The planet killer destroyed, the human rebel sacrificing himself to strike a blow against Iconian tyranny. In hidden bases and secret meetings, the oppressed species of the galaxy whispered his name, a symbol of defiance and hope. And on a dozen worlds, the first shots of revolution rang out, as the Empire began to crumble from within. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.